Hello everybody, welcome to the Gratiaen Pods. We are here with the 31st Gratiaen Prize winner, Ramya Jirasinghe. We are having this conversation in the National Archives, surrounded by the wonderful tombs and historical documents that make up our history. The Gratiaen podcasts are supported by the British Council. Hello Ramya and welcome to the Gratiaen Pods.
Hi Ameena, good to be here.
First, congratulations on winning the Gratiaen Prize. It must be so exciting for you.
Thank you. It was unexpected.
Was it? Well, we were in the audience and we were absolutely rooting for you.
Oh, thank you.
Now, you're a very established Sri Lankan poet. That's what I know you as, a wonderful poet. So it was a bit of a surprise to me to hear that you had submitted a novel for the Gratiaen Prize. Tell me a little bit about that journey.
Well, the start of this novel really happened more like a poem. Because in 2010, there was a call for a short opening, the opening para for a novel by the Guardian, the UK Guardian, for the Women's Prize. That was known as the Women's Prize now, but it was called the Orange Prize then. So they called for opening para of a book called The Letting Go, a fictional book. And I sent it in, and that was a poem because it was a one short paragraph. And I sent it in, and I got selected as a runners-up, one of the runners-up. And then it just lay there without me knowing how to move it from the para, because I was, as you said, more used to short form, move it into a novel. And it took about 15 years since then for it to turn into a novel.
But it was always at the back of your mind, I presume. You
always.
Must have been always thinking about it.
And trying to collect ideas of how to make it grow. And in the end, COVID happened.
Yeah.
And then there was this block of time where we were stuck at home and I wrote. And then it flowed.
So I think it's important that you have spoken about it, because a lot of people believe that, you know, all the books and poems that come out of writers just happen, that it is no effort at all. But I think you've clearly shown that this had to germinate first in your head, and then it came out as a book. And imagine that it came out as a prize-winning book. So you must have given a lot of thought to it. Now, actually, when I read the opening paragraph, I remembered. So it was so well crafted, that paragraph, that I remembered reading it 20 years ago, and it still stayed with me. Now, I love the title, right? Father Cabral's Recipe for Love Cake, but the novel is much more than cake. How would you describe it?
Well, to go back to your first comment, when you have a novel or an idea, you really don't know what's going to come out. So I had the paragraph. I really had no idea, no clue of how it was going to evolve. So it started off with a woman making a cake, and as you say now, it grew into something very different. This so-called Father Cabral appeared later, and how that happens, I really don't know. That whole creative, and you're a novelist as well, so you know that process is hard to control. Have you had that experience?
I have, and I actually have a question here where, did you feel your characters took a life of their own and then started guiding the book around? Did you feel that?
100%. And more than the characters, I think it's what Stephen King says. He says the material controls you in the end. You don't control the material. And I really experienced that. In a way, it's very liberating, because then you realize you don't have to plan it out. It will happen. But you have to put so much effort to sit there every day and start writing and write. Because it's a blank canvas.
And then there must have come a point where you couldn't wait to leave real life and get back to your fictional characters, because you were driven by their stories.
Absolutely, because that setting that I started off with, that first para, was a little cosmos of its own.
Yes.
You know? And then you don't know what's going to happen, and it surprises you. What happens surprises you as well, and you sometimes you sit in the morning and think, oh, what's going to happen now, next? You know, so it's almost as if you're a reader of your own text, in the writing process.
Yeah, I quite empathize with that.
Right.
But I'm also interested in the structure of your story. So the opening paragraph sets it squarely in the modern age. But with the second chapter, you go, 400 years back. And did you know, when you were writing the first chapter, did you know that the medieval story also has to be told?
No, I didn't know. I didn't know, and I also didn't know how the story would evolve. For instance, some of the things that happened much later in the novel happened because it seemed to happen. Because I couldn't plan it. I really didn't know what type of time period I was going to set it in. Although I knew it was love cake, and I knew the love cake had all the Dutch kind of history around it. In the end, I found that I was drawing out a lot from different types of colonial experiences. So it's not just the Dutch anymore, it becomes Portuguese, and you said you found it resonated more with the Portuguese era, right?
I did find that, but you're right in the sense. So firstly, we have to establish this is a unnamed country.
Yes, unnamed country, but people, because there are references to Sri Lanka, and that's done in a very unusual way, because the character is asked, was that Sri Lanka, was that Myanmar, or whatever. People think it's Sri Lanka, but it's not. But it feels a lot like Sri Lanka because it draws a lot from the Dutch forts.
But you also did a lot of research?
What I had read throughout my life, I guess, helped.
Yeah.
And where we are right now has so much stuff, the archives.
I know, this is a treasure, a treasure house of documents, and the tomb and all the, actually the country's history.
And the originals are there.
Yeah, I know.
Handwritten originals, absolutely.
So when you were there things that surprised you when you were doing your research? There were lots of things when I was reading the manuscript that maybe you know it at the back of your head. So the slave trade, for one thing, but it surprised me. So how did you get information on that, the details of how the slaves came, how the colonizers treated them?
So that's the thing. I mean, we all know, we've grown up with Slave Island, we've heard of Slave Island, but very few of us have put the time and effort to find out about the extent of the slave trade that the Dutch engaged in from the east, from the Indonesian islands and the Malayan islands. And once you start researching it, of course, there are research papers. So having access to JSTOR and then access to a place like this, you can find a lot of research academic papers on this.
And what part did Sri Lanka or Ceylon play in the slave trade?
So we were bang in the middle of it.
Right.
Because there were slaves that were brought here. And also earlier, during the Portuguese era, I think talk quite a lot about the Inquisition. And no one knows about the Portuguese Inquisition that took place in Goa, where the priests were burnt at the stake.
Yeah.
So those are things I found out as I was doing my research.
And parallel to the slave trade, you have the spice trade.
Yes. So it's all because of the spice trade.
Yes.
It was commodities, right?
What I really liked about the book was that you showed the African traders in another role. I mean, that's not something that we think about as actually having run the trade. And I liked that you brought that in, because before the white colonizers came in, the trade was run by other people. It's not that trade started with them. Did that come from, was it a deliberate choice to highlight that?
African and the Arabian traders and also the people. What I really wanted to show was that you bring people to a country as a colonizer, and I don't think you have the control you think you have over them. They will take a life of their own, they will build their own relationships, and they are in a way more in power than the colonizer. It's just that they don't exert it because the colonizer has the arms. It becomes material power, they have material power. But the people who've been colonized or who have been brought through them have other ways of showing their power. So in my book, for instance, the commodities are not sold by the African traders to the Dutch or the colonizer in the book.
Yeah.
Because that type of power they can keep. So it's about power, it's the use of power.
And it's also, you highlight how the ways in which the Dutch took control of the trade, which was completely unethical and really quite tragic.
Yes.
And also the intermarriage that happened between traders, between African and Arab traders with local populations, and as well as the Portuguese and the Dutch with local population. So that was also very sensitive. I liked that you did it so normally. You didn't exoticize it or anything. It was like just a fact that was given, and then you went on with the story. Was that something you deliberately set out to do?
No. No, I think the characters did that. But of course, we've grown up hearing about the casados. Casados are the Portuguese who married the locals, were known as the casados. So we have grown up hearing about these things. What we haven't done is try to imagine how they lived once they did made those choices about their lives. You know, a Portuguese soldier comes here and marries a local woman. How does his life change? You know, how do they then mix with the locals?
And also the fact is that then they will have children.
Yes.
And then who do those children marry? Who are those children allowed to marry?
Yes.
So that was a very interesting point that you brought up. Now, because Father Cabral is in the title, what was his character like?
Oh, I thought of him as a complete liberal, a modern day liberal.
Yes,
because
in fact,
he
was a revolutionary.
Yes,
you would say.
Total revolutionary, total liberal, because and also maybe a humanist, because he befriends the local priests, the monks.
Yes.
And so
the Buddhist monks.
The Buddhist monks.
Yeah.
Because these things happened. The Buddhist priests and the Arabian, the traders were wiped out by the Portuguese and they hid. But if we put our imagination into it, there must have been people who contacted the colonizers, who were in touch with them. Because you can't have complete divisions of peoples when they're living in a small place like this. So they would have been aware of what was happening, where people were hiding. You know, there would have been enabling as well by the colonizer. There would have been, you know.
So was Father Cabral based on any figure that you read about?
Not a figure that I read about, but I found out that the early 17th or late 17th century, there were a lot of Jesuit monks who went to Tibet and also to Japan. And they met Buddhist monks. And they brought back what they found about impermanence and this soul, the concept of a no soul, to Europe. But where it went, I haven't really followed through. But those ideas were coming back through the Jesuit monks to Europe.
That's very interesting.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
so everything that's in the book is based on an actual fact. Although I have brought my imagination and brought it to life, these things did happen.
And I think that is why when you read the book, you realize this is not just Sri Lanka, but it is the story of other colonized countries as well, especially in the global south. You know, what they experienced and how different it was for when trade happened, when it was in the hands of the Arabs and the Africans. You have some really interesting characters. So I must say I was more drawn to the medieval story because everything was so new to it. So in the medieval story, I loved Santiago de Mello. I liked Raina. And then when she's baptized, her name changes
to Maria.
To Maria. So those are also little hints that when you now she changed her faith because of Santiago, but also you have a very tender love story with her first husband. I won't spoil everything, I won't reveal everything, but there's a lot of tenderness and a lot of deep, meaningful love that is right through the book. How did that change? I know that the story would have been flowing, but also was it the fact that you were apart during COVID, you were by yourself, maybe with your mom, and I don't know if your daughter was still with you, so that little cocooned world brought out certain elements that were important?
I don't think so, Ameena. I don't think it worked that way. I think I looked at all these characters as very real people. And I didn't think that the time difference between them and us, the gap between them and us, made them think or feel or relate to the people they cared about in any way different to the way we would now. I think that will never change.
Yeah, that's quite right. And it shows that love actually endures through the ages.
Yes, yes.
Maybe different forms, but it's still love.
Still love.
And then you have a very interesting, strong-minded modern character. Very strong. Yes. How did she come about?
So she was there from the very start.
It was a very exotic name.
It was a very long name, which she changes for the West, as you know. She was there from the start, and that she was the problem really, because at the start when I first wrote the paragraph, I didn't know where to take her. I didn't know what to do with her, because she was this person in this house. But slowly, once the past came in, it became easier to see where she set herself within that larger history of her own life.
At no point, when you found it difficult, did you think, I want to change that beginning paragraph?
No, because then I wouldn't have known what to do with the book. No.
So actually that beginning paragraph was your spine in a way. Yeah. That set that you knew it had to relate to that. You knew there was a story. Yes. There was a story there.
And it had been validated by someone else who had also read it and felt it was a good start and said the most important thing, that it created a setting where you also wanted to know what was going to happen next.
Now with the two parallel stories, there are two very interesting things happening. So one is transition, when you have the one colonizer giving way to the other colonizer and changing the way trade happens. The other one is the modern story. Do you want to talk a little bit about the influences in the modern story? So you have a country that is also going through a period of transition. Did what was happening in our country have an influence?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think you can read this book and not see where Sri Lanka has influenced me. But then it can be any third world country. If you go to Africa, you'd find situations like this. If you go to the Caribbean, you'll find situations like this. These upheavals, the conflicts, and the corruption. Corruption where one group of people have all the power and the wealth and the others don't. You know, the inequality is very, very common in a colonized country because that's what we became very good at doing to our own people. So I think you will see that it has Sri Lanka a lot there, but it can be anywhere else
see
as well.
The Aragalaya also. In a way, I wasn't sure if it was Aragalaya, if it was some kind of uprising. There was an uprising and Rajiv, I think, no? Rajiv Almeida was who comes from a privileged family, was also instrumental in part of the uprising. So I was also struck that your two characters came from positions of privilege, but their stance was very much for the common people. And I think that's a nice touch, that all persons of privilege are not necessarily immune to what is happening around. But again, were those deliberate choices that you made, or did it just happen?
It just happened, but I think it also, the book also shows that they become misfits in a way because the system doesn't support them.
Yes.
I don't want to spoil as well, but the system doesn't support them.
Was this an easy book to write?
It was an easy book for me to write, but I think some people who read the first draft, which had a lot of violence in it, found it difficult. So I cut down a lot on the violence.
So what was you've been edited, this book has gone through an editing process.
Yes.
What was that like? Was it easy? Was it difficult? Was it?
Oh, it was wonderful. I think I really learned the value of editing.
Yes.
Having a proper editor work on your book. And that person's perspective helps, because I had people saying, oh, why did you ever do that to that character?
Yes.
You know? And I realize now, reading other books, I ask the same question, because you realize the author has the power to do or not do something to a character. And you think, oh no, you didn't have to do that. And I'm glad there are things that I could have done, and I did, and I kind of re-edited and rewrote those.
Was that, so how long did that process take?
Oh, it took only 3 months to write the book. It took
Wow.
about 6 months to edit it.
Yes.
Because we went line by line by line, and then we saw a lot of structural problems.
Now that's completely different from writing a poem, right?
Oh, yeah.
What is writing? Tell me the difference between writing. Do poems get edited?
Yes, of course. You craft it over and over again. Only thing is it's short, unless it's a long epic or something. It's shorter. Novel is a different thing altogether.
Are poems edited by other people, or is it you going through line by line?
No, if there is a good industry for poetry, and Sri Lanka doesn't have a big market for poetry, I'm sure it's edited. At Faber and all that, I'm sure they get edited. It's just that here there's hardly a readership for poetry, and it doesn't.
Yeah,
there's no one to edit your poetry.
Well, I know you had Anne Ranasinghe
Yes.
as a mentor,
Yes.
and I'm sure she must have given you a lot of positive feedback.
A lot of constructive criticism, yes, and from her I learned to edit my poetry.
So which meant that you were open to the feedback that she was giving. And I think a lot of young writers and a lot of new writers need to understand that everybody needs feedback. Even the most adept, seasoned writer also gets feedback and editing for their work.
Not
right?
just feedback, you just need that person to take a red pen and go through the whole thing with a red pen fearlessly.
So
and
the
you
first
have to be able
time
to
your manuscript came back like that, were you shocked?
I was like, oh my goodness, so much to rework. But I was so happy because I knew I would never get this here.
Yes.
And I was very, very happy to see that process.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that I'm really glad we're talking about that, because that is a process that is generally not spoken about by someone who has gone through it.
Right.
So now you have gone through it, and you can actually give confidence to other writers that editing is not such a bad process. It might be arduous, but
Yeah.
it can, you yourself can see a better product.
And also I think as a writer, well, I'm not a novelist in any sense the way you are. You have written so much more than me, but I feel you must not hang on to your work.
That's called killing your darling.
Yes, okay, in that sense, yes, killing your darlings. And just let it take its own course. And if someone advises you and sees something that needs to be amended, you have to go with it.
What if you disagreed? Were there any points where you disagreed?
No, that's the thing. So you have to find an editor who has the same kind of, she loved the book from the start. So we both loved what we had.
Yeah.
And so you have to start from that point. Because if someone who says, oh, I don't like this, let's see what we can do with it, I don't think then that's the right editor for you.
So did it happen by accident that you found your editor, or?
No, so my editor happens to be my agent.
Okay.
And that took a lot of work. I had to send my manuscript out to 30, 40 people.
30, 40 agents?
Yes.
Right, this manuscript?
Yes.
And then?
They all came back saying, no time, not our type of thing. And then this one person picked it up and said she loved it.
That's all you need?
Just one person,
Yeah.
yes.
And
Yeah.
okay, so I hope that we see the book in print soon.
That.
Now, I like also that, so Berama,
Yeah.
that,
So bear, you know where bear comes? I didn't realize. So when I was looking for a Portuguese word for sea, I think it means sea shore.
Ma, I think means
sea.
and Bera
means
is
the
city
coast.
by the sea.
Coast,
Yes,
no?
coast.
Yes.
So that is what you called
The country.
the country, yes.
Yes.
And then you also have a fort.
Yes.
That is there within it.
Yes.
And you have this story of this very unique house. I can't imagine where that came from.
That I think my own childhood.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in houses like that, out of Colombo, my
Yeah.
grandparents' homes. So I've always loved those old, huge houses with pillars and, attics and things like that. So that was easy to write.
But then there's a secret the house has,
Yes,
which
yes.
came from your imagination.
Well, I think when you're a child, if you go into a house like that and there's nobody in the house, don't you always look for things like that? You imagine things like that. And I think I was able to bring that to life. And also, I used to go to the golf fort a lot in the early 90s. No, sorry, the late 90s. And it was a different place. It hadn't been gentrified. And the original Muslim population was there. And there was something so atmospheric in the evenings. Everyone was talking outdoors. And I tried to capture that in this book.
I think you have captured it very well, actually.
Okay, thank you.
And I like the interaction between the neighbors.
Yes.
Who were,
watching over the veranda, yes.
Which is true, which is what happens in a
Yes.
small country like that. Let's see now. What now, when you do the transition from one colonial master to the other, you did it very deftly, in the sense that I didn't realize, you did it in a very gentle way, and I realized when I read it, that is the way it must have come in. So you have one set of traders, and then you have another set, but a bit more ambitious, a bit more forceful, and then they start trying to take control. That has to come. Was it something that you always had at the back of your mind?
No, because once you set yourself firmly within that cosmos, has its own set of rules. So if there are no newspapers and if there's no internet, anyway the information is going to go the news of even a takeover is going to travel very slowly or fast, depending on who's carrying it to whom. And if you kind of set yourself within that, then you realize for some people it might never have changed. Nothing would have changed the entire life, even though this huge political change took place.
I like that you bring up that point, so that for some people life goes on as it is,
always,
because they're too far removed from the centers of power.
That can happen in Colombo too, if you want to do that to yourself, right? Even now, but you don't.
So I found the book very sensitively written, and there were the untold stories also of small populations that you don't think about. And to wrap up, is there a love cake recipe? I know you have ended the book with it. Is it your family recipe, or is it?
Well, I do have my favorite, and I have used it in the book. So anyway,
but I loved that you put it, Ramya, like how a family recipe would be passed on, with odd bits of ingredients and measurements, and it means that everyone has to tweak and make their perfect love cake recipe. Thank you so much for the conversation. It was really a delight to hear more about the book after having read it. And thank you to the National Archives for giving us access to this wonderful space with all the tomes and much of our history here. Thank you to the John Keells Foundation, who are partners of the Trust, and most of all, thank you to the British Council.